Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about VR today. Well, first, I'll give you the agenda for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about VR. We're also going to talk about your presentations for next week. So next week we're going to be presenting your current progress on your projects. So each of you will come up and present up here, show us your current game. So if your game is not very far along, then you should be embarrassed and everybody will laugh at you. If you're really impressive, then everybody's expectations will be a lot higher. So that final one should be amazing, right? So, and then everywhere in between. So in any case, we'll talk about that here first in a few minutes. But I'm going to be introducing this thing. Thank you. I'll be introducing this thing called VRTK today. Now, I just started talking about that a little bit, didn't I? Did I get very far into why we're using that? No. All right, so we'll talk about that first, and then we'll go through a couple of tutorials together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to break off into groups, all right? Because ultimately, you are going to need to come in here to work on the virtual reality aspects of your project. Okay, VRTK does have a simulator, so it doesn't work real great. We'll mess with it a little bit so you can kind of see how it works. But we have 3 different workstations. So we have this one, which becomes our VR cart. So we do have a third one. So this one, and then 2 in the other room. So we'll break into groups of 3, and I'll have each of you go through a tutorial for getting teleportation. Or one of the things. Maybe we might end up doing teleportation ourselves, and maybe we'll do a pointer one. But we'll do some stuff together, and then we'll split into groups so that each of you can do it as a team of students, where you're not just watching me do it. So you're actually practicing doing it and making sure you can log into the machines and all that stuff. Okay, so that's kind of what today is going to be about. Let's talk about the presentations first. Let me do some stuff here. And actually, Tim, do you want to pull that door shut, just because I'm going to end up playing a video and stuff in a little bit, so it'll be... Okay. Now, it is going to be kind of experimental when we go to do the tutorial and actually try it on the VR headset, because we only have one DVI output. So I have some adapters to try, but we'll see what happens. It's possible we won't be able to see it on here. You'll only be able to see it on here, so we'll have to crowd around. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so let's talk about presentations. So let me check something here real quick. All right, so presentations are going to be about 20 minutes long. All right, so you need to get up here, load your game up, demo us, show us, take us through your game, talk about the story you're presenting, talk about what you've done, demo it for us. So there should be a demo. What is the story? What have been the challenges? What has been easier than you thought? And then lastly, how will you enhance this with VR? So that's going to be the thing you're going to be able to think about from this week to next, because we're going to be talking about VR specifically today. Okay, so about 20 minutes. Be prepared to take some questions and stuff like that. I think we have, about 10 people? We're missing one person? Or is everybody who's still in the class here? Everyone. I think this is everyone. Yeah, she dropped. So, so we have 9 people. So, 20 minutes with some breaks that'll get through there. And then after that, if we have some time left, if you have questions that you want me to look at how something works, if you want to look at your your falling asteroid stuff, we can do that. That makes sense what I said? Yeah. So, I mean, because how big's your town? He was just to throw this out there. He was asking the question about he's going to be, raining down fire and fury on this town. How many? This is what I would probably do, because you want to basically make look like it's raining fire on the town, right? For performance reasons, what I would probably do is I would create a prefab, so a small sphere, big enough that you can see, and then put a kind of a fire particle effect on it. All right, and that's your prefab. So whenever this guy is when his script is enabled, he's showing the fire stuff. Then what I would do is I would put that guy up in the sky, and then I would put a whole bunch of them up there, create like a grid of them. All right. So I'm just trying to think. So a couple different ways you can handle this, but this is probably the way I would do it for performance reasons. So you have this big grid of these things up there. So let's just say you have 30 of them. All right. So you have to figure out how many you need to make it look dense enough that it's raining fire. So maybe 30, maybe 50, maybe 15, whatever it is for the size of your town or whatever. Throw them up in the sky. And then what I would do is I would put them into an array of game objects for your scene manager. And when your scene manager loads, go through and turn off the script and turn off the renderer. So you don't see it and it's not generating particles. Okay? And they're just up there. You could also make it kinematic so it doesn't fall. They don't fall yet because they're going to be rigid bodies. Then what you'll do is when you're ready for them to fall, you'll have a function in your game manager that says, make things fall or whatever you call the function. What you'll do is you'll write a for loop, go through there, turn the scripts on for all of them, turn the renderers on for all of them. So now they show up and they're on fire, and then make them not kinematic, so they'll fall. Okay, so now they're falling out of the sky. Now, what I would do is I would set up their box colliders to be triggers. That way they don't actually hit the ground. Well, let's think about this. That actually might be a cool effect, having it hit the ground.
Well, I already have the effect that they hit the ground and they destroy it by itself. I already know this.
So you already have what it looks like when they hit the ground. You just need something that falls to the ground.
Yeah, I already have something that falls to the ground, but I need to detect when the script is end and then, start falling.
Well, that's the part I'm talking about here, where you have your scene manager that's holding this array of game objects, and what it does is it essentially releases them by going through and turning on the renderer, turning on the script, and turning kinematic off so that their rigid bodies are allowed to fall. But if you wanted to continually rain, a couple of things you can do is you can either make it a trigger, so it falls through the earth, and then put a layer underneath the ground. That's, called like a bounce back layer or something. And when it collides, it give that guy a tag called, like below earth or something like that. And when it hits that, reset their positions up here so they fall again. Oh, okay. That way they keep falling. Another thing you can do, though, is if you want them to actually hit the ground like it's a little fiery pebble and it hits the ground and bounces a little bit or something like that, then don't make it a trigger. Instead, when it actually collides with the ground, maybe do an invoke in a quarter of a second or a half a second or something like that, where it'll reposition itself up in the sky, but after it's bounced around a little bit. So it's still doing its thing physics-wise on the ground, but in a quarter second, from a user's perspective, it'll disappear from here and just show up again up here. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's along the lines of how I would do it. Okay, so in any case, it's kind of concerning. Did that happen before where I got a Slack notification during class? Usually, I thought that most computers turn off notifications when you have it projecting through a screen. Because I know my Mac does that. Because I just got and this one wasn't a big deal, but there's a couple of those Slack channels that have some pretty questionable content going on in them. I don't think you're in that one.
No, Josh showed us.
Oh, yeah, Meme Smorgasbord? Yeah. I would not want was he showing you my comments?
Yeah, I didn't see all of it. But
no.
Yeah.
I never make bad comments. I've never once. Just. It was Curcio that showed it to you?
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it wasn't. But it was actually Mr. Gonzalez that said those things.
Right.
Yeah, that's good point.
I went on a little bit of a rant in there, and then I came back and I said, sorry, Mr. Gonzalez got a hold of my phone. What's up, guys? And there was some pretty funny stuff in there that is not classroom appropriate. I mean, it doesn't even skate along the lines of classroom appropriate. Okay, so any questions about the presentations next week?
Nope.
You can use my computer to set it up if you want, so I'll have it up here. So make sure you bring your project then on a jump drive. If you'd prefer to use your computer, you can. You don't have to use mine, but mine will be here for you to use. I would assume that this would run Unity better than probably any of your machines. So if you're looking for something that'll run it pretty well, then you have that. Maybe during the week too, after you're introduced to the systems in here, maybe come in and make sure that you can launch your project off the jump drive on one of the machines in there, just so you know it works off on a different machine other than the computer you're always developing on. Okay? So 20 minutes long, you're going to demo it. Tell us about the story that you're doing, how you're trying to tell that story, what things you found difficult, what things were easier than you thought they should be, and then give us a foreshadowing of how you're going to how you envision VR playing into this. Okay? So now let's talk about challenge of VR. And this is really more from a developer perspective, this challenge of VR thing. So what I have hooked up to this machine in here is the Oculus Rift. So this is one of the, actually I don't technically have it hooked up yet, but we will hook it up today, and then we'll see what happens with the projector and stuff. Because we have had issues with that before. But in any case, this is an Oculus Rift, so we'll call this one of the professional level VR headset things. In the other room, we have another Oculus Rift, and we also have an HTC Vive. In the department, we also have a second HTC Vive. So we have two of each of the things. But right here, right now, we have three total, 2 Rifts and 1 Vive. I should note that the stuff that we're doing right here is also going to be beneficial to you for the hackathon. Hackathon's what, a week from Saturday? That sound right?
Yeah.
Week from this Saturday. So all of you should be participating in that hackathon, and we're going to be doing VR stuff in there, specifically using VRTK, which I'm going to be introducing today. Now this will get a little interesting because they just released a new version of VRTK. So we'll see if anything breaks from the things I know, coupled with the videos that I've worked with. Whatever. Now, Tim, you have not used VRTK, right? And you were in Tim's group at the hackathon. You were in Tim's group at the hackathon? So you didn't use VRTK. So none of you have used VRTK before, right?
Correct.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I know many of you haven't done anything with VR, but several of these guys have done some stuff with VR, but they've used something called Steamvr. So let's talk about the challenges of it. So this is the Oculus Rift. So we have two, let's call it professional level things. We have Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. All right, and let me put those in separate lines here. All right, so these are our two, let's call it good VR headsets. Actually, mobile VR is making a comeback here. We'll talk about that a little bit as we kind of get into this, but let's just stick with this for now. What does that sound? I don't think so, because I think it was doing it beforehand. It's unrelated to.
You're talking about the high-pitched one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's either the projector or the fan again.
No, it's probably on that one. On those machines.
Okay. It's very strange. It's weird. This happened in another class for a different teacher one time, where they it's like the audio gets flip-flopped. Just play it on here and see if I can mess with these.
Master version, or what will be version 3.2.0 of VRTK, which will be released to the Unity Asset Store soon. So we're going to be getting the GitHub master version, and to get that, we're going to go to our web browser, and we're going to go to github.com/thestonefox/VRTK, or you can just visit vrtk.io, and that'll take you to here, and then we're just going to click on the clone or download button, or you can get the
All right. Still kind of funky, but I think this will at least make it work. All right, so what he's talking about is the two different ways you can get VRTK. The way we're going to get it is from the Unity Asset Store.
VRTK tutorial video. Today we're going to be setting up VRTK with Steamvr. Now you can do this one of two ways. You can either get VRTK from the Unity Asset Store, or you can get VRTK from GitHub. I recommend getting VRTK from GitHub, as it's always the most up-to-date and it's the one with the most bug fixes in. At present, this setup is only going to be for what's on the current GitHub master version, or what will be version 3.2.0 of VRTK, which will be released to the Unity Asset Store soon. So we're going to be getting the GitHub master version, and to get that, we're going to go to our web browser. And we're going to go to github.com/thestonefox/VRTK.
We're not going to do it this way.
vrtk.io, and that'll take you to here. And then we're just going to click on the clone or download button, and we can click download zip. And then we're going to save that to our drive. And once that's downloaded, you'll see the zip file, which we will extract to our desktop. Once the zip file is extracted, we'll go ahead and we'll open Unity, and then we'll open this project within Unity. So I'm using Unity 5.6, VRTK currently supports Unity 5.6 and Unity 5.5. The current version on the Unity Asset Store is 5.4 and
5.6 is effectively what we're using. We're using the 2017, which is what 5.6 turned into. So this still works.
5, but when version 3.2.0 comes out, that will be 5.5 and 5.6 Unity compatible only. So what we need to do now is we click open, and then within the folder that we've downloaded, which was our VRTK master folder, we just click select folder. Then we'll get a message pop-up saying opening project and non-matching editor installation. We can just ignore this and just click continue. Then we'll see VRTK is opened up within Unity, and we can look at the VRTK folder, and we can go to the example scene. So if we just open the simple pointer example, we can see that by default, we don't get any camera rendering here.
So one thing you can do is, he's kind of showing you here, and this is true of a lot of different packages, and you've hopefully already seen this, is when you go to download stuff off the Unity Asset Store, a lot of times those things already have like sample scenes, where you can double click on the sample scene and see all the cool stuff that they've done with it. And if you want to do something similar to what they've done, you can just go and look at how they did it and mimic it in yours. So similar thing here, they have a whole bunch of sample scenes where they've already accomplished these different VR stuff like teleportation and pointers and things like that. So, you can go in and look at it, and once you've kind of figured out how, they accomplish those things, it's not too big of a deal. But the important thing, kind of what they want to accomplish in this first video, is how do you initially set up VRTK for the platforms you want to target? Because all this other stuff is going to be the same. That's kind of what we've been talking about, where we are going to learn how to target VRTK as our platform, and then let VRTK do the heavy lifting for the conversion between the different headsets. So that takes some initial setup to make sure that our game or our environment is set up correctly for that. And that's what this first video goes through. And then we'll look at some teleportation stuff or something like that.
Yeah, and this is using the new SDK switcher. So if you were to run this seed,
this SDK switcher thing he's talking about was in the previous version, so I assume it's still in the new version. So, and we'll mess with it today. We'll see if we can get the simulator working on here, because there actually is a VR simulator that comes with VRTK, which on paper sounds cool, because that means you should be able to do your VR development stuff at home, and then come in here and test it for real, right? So, but understand that a VR simulator is going to be ghetto. It's not going to work great. In fact, I've messed with it several times, and there's certain things you can get to work okay, but it's not real good, but it might let you accomplish something, I suppose. But anyways, this switcher thing, it will try to detect if you what kind of headset you have on, whether it's a Vive or a Rift, and it will switch automatically. But if you want to, let's say you have a Rift attached to your computer, but you're doing some quick testing and you don't want to have to put the headset on, so you want to go ahead and test it with the virtual VR thing, you can just switch over to that with that one of those buttons up top there, so that you don't have to put the headset on to test. All right, so kind of a handy thing once you figure out what things are reasonable to rely on the VR simulator for versus which things you really need the headset for.
What will happen is it will show us that none of our SDKs are installed and only the simulator is working. So if we run this, by default, we'll only be able to use the simulator. So I'm using the mouse to move around here, and I'm using WASD to move left and right. So this is just a simulator. So we want to get this working with Steamvr, so I'm just going to stop this. And what we now want to do is just install the Steamvr plugin from the asset store. So if we go to the asset store.
And let me point something else out there real quick, and that's even what he just showed there is kind of a big deal for us. Because let's assume we were using the Steamvr plugin before instead of VRTK. If you try to write Steamvr stuff and you didn't have a headset plugged in, it would notice you don't have a headset plugged in, and it would try to run it using the WSDK, or WADS keys, WASD keys. Yeah, WASD keys. But the kicker there, the problem, is you think about our game up to this point where we've had our first-person controller and we kind of move through the world, and we might bump into a collider, and that collider sets something off, right? Well, if you're doing that with SteamVR, even though you think your guy is moving through the world, his transform is not changing. So the camera is moving, but your actual player prefab is not actually moving through the world. That's important. If we want him to be able to bump into stuff and set off triggers, we need him to actually move. So at the very least, the simulator thing here will make your guy actually move. All right, so if you get nothing else out of the VR emulator, it's that when you use the WASD keys, your guy will actually move through the world, not just appear to move through the world. So one big benefit right off the bat.
So, and if we search for SteamVR.
All right, so what he's doing here is, even though we have the VRTK package, any of these other platforms we want to support, we're still going to need the SDKs for those. All right, so he's going and he's getting the Steamvr SDK, which is on the Unity Asset Store. If he wants to support Oculus, which we'll look at here in a few minutes, he won't be able to get it from the Asset Store because it's not up there. He'll have to go over to Oculus's website and download it. But what he'll do is he's going to bring them into his project, and then he'll let VRTK know about them. So at that point, VRTK is taking over the control of those SDKs, and we can revert back to just writing for VRTK. Make sense? So we still need SteamVR, we still need the Oculus SDK, but we're not going to be directly interfacing with those guys. Instead, we're going to be directly talking to VRTK, and VRTK will talk to SteamVR when it needs to. It'll talk to Oculus SDK when it needs to.
And if we click the SteamVR plugin, then we just need to click import. If we haven't already downloaded this will say download, and it will do the same thing. It will download first and then import into our project. So we'll just click import here, we've already downloaded it. Then once it's ready to import, we'll get the import Unity package window, and all we need to do is click import down the bottom. Then once it's imported, we'll get the SteamVR settings window, just click accept all. It will tell us we made the right choice, we can click OK. And now we've got SteamVR installed, you can see that the VRTK SDK manager is automatically updated and it's recognised that SteamVR is installed. And these are the order that it will load in the SDKs. Yeah,
so see over here, already you can kind of see what it supports here. So the order is going to be the simulator. I'm guessing it goes top down. So the simulator will be its last ditch effort. Right? So if it can't find anything else, it'll load the simulator. So it's showing it has the Daydream VRTK. It has the Oculus VR SDK. It has this Immerse VR, which is made by Oculus. I don't know what that is. There must be another thing happening here. Then it has SteamVR. And they talk about it somewhere in here. I'm pretty sure if you're using both SteamVR and Oculus VR, you need to make sure Oculus is higher up on your list, because we've mentioned in here that SteamVR does technically support Oculus, right? Not great, but it does do it. So what it's doing is it's going down this list. It's trying to initiate each of these SDKs in that order. And as soon as one turns on, then it says that's the one you must have. So if you have SteamVR ahead of Oculus SDK, SteamVR will always turn on when you have an Oculus in there, even though you're not getting great support for it. Makes sense? That's why you need to have the Oculus higher up on the priority list. But what we can see right here, and then I promise you that there's also a Gear VR SDK here as well. So what you're seeing here is if you learn VRTK, that we can target the Daydream, the Gear VR, the Rift, the Vive, all these different headsets, and especially if we make this assumption that mobile VR is going to become more of a thing, okay? Because really, this professional level VR is it's restrictive right now, right? It doesn't go with you. If I'm at my house and I want to go do VR stuff with the Vive set up in my house, I got to go down to my VR room I have set up in my house with the sensors all there and all that stuff. Well, it's not convenient. Sometimes I don't want to walk the stairs, so I don't do it. It's pure label, Joseph. You know what I'm talking about. I'm just pure. No, actually, hold on. I'm not ripping on. I'm ripping on me. You know I'm lazy, right? You could vouch for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, so I'm ripping on myself this time. Doesn't that make you feel better? You just immediately saw the worst in what I was saying. Yeah. That's what you're doing.
That's good.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's inconvenient for me to go down there, so I don't. But I'll tell you what, if I had that Oculus Go, where I didn't even have to, I mean, I'm too lazy to take my phone out of its case. If I had the Oculus Go, just sit on the couch, and I wanted to watch a show in VR, I could just do that. I got to figure out how to turn those things off, because one of these times a really bad message is going to show up. It's going to show up on there. Yeah. So in any case, hopefully this is evidence that learning this VRTK tool is going to be important, because it won't matter who comes out with the next, iteration. When Apple comes out with their VR thing, it'll be just a matter of time before VRTK comes up with their plugin for that to talk to it.
So because it's got this one installed now, it will load this SDK before it tries to load the simulator SDK. So if we go back to our scene and we load this scene up, this will now run within SteamVR. So let's go ahead and do that by clicking play. So as you can see, we're now using the SteamVR plug.
Yeah, so we make the assumption here that he must have had an HTC Vive. You see the shape of the controller? So he must have had a Vive hooked up to his computer. He did nothing different there other than downloading SteamVR plugin, which his VRTK actually auto-detected. And now all of a sudden he hits play, and instead of running in the simulator, it's using his SteamVR, the SteamVR plugin for the controls.
Does the Vive controller always have an active science logo on it?
Was that the? I'm guessing that's their skin. That's the VRTK skin for this guy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so you can tell it's a Vive controller, but yeah, the one that comes with SteamVR, it looks exactly like the SteamVR controller is. This must be their skin. What did you say it's a logo to?
Aperture Science from Portal 142.
Oh, yeah, I'm not familiar. I mean, I know the games.
Right.
And we can see the SteamVR controller. The example scene works.
So now look over here on the left. You can see that as he's moving stuff around, you can see that stuff
You
moving.
can also switch the SDK back to the simulator in real time if you wanted. So to do that, if we just click on the switch SDK setup, and then if we click simulator, that's now switched into the simulator mode, so I can use my mouse to move around. And if you want to switch back to SteamVR, we can just click SteamVR in there.
All right, so even that last little thing there, switching from Steam to the simulator, believe me when I tell you that will be helpful. You know, when you figure out what things can you legitimately test with the simulator versus having to put the actual headset on, you know, it's going to be cool the first 2 or 3 times you have to put that headset on to test something stupid. But when you're debugging some part of your problem, some part of your code, whether you can grab something and you have to take that headset on and off 50 times, that gets pretty annoying. You know, when we were working on this over the summer, we would end up having one person in VR and another person trying stuff, and then having the human that was in VR tell you what they saw. You know, it's just not very convenient. Usually it was Joseph who would tell us what he saw. Because I didn't even say anything bad yet. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The VRTK, does it come with its own camera?
It comes with its own prefabs.
Okay.
Yeah. So you use their, and I'll show you that here. That's it, kind of in like the next thing.
Okay.
But yeah, it has its own camera rig prefab.
Okay.
So you do all the stuff using their way of doing things, and then let them handle the equivalents and the stuff. But it's not drastically different than what you're used to.
Okay, so, I know the Steamvr has its own camera. The Oculus, the Daydream has its own camera.
Yeah.
If we're using the VRTK, it automatically switches, like.
I would presume it does something to make their camera rig compatible with those other guys' camera rigs. But as a developer, what we do is we use VRTK's camera and then let VRTK do the magic of how does this work for Steam? How does this work for Oculus? How does this work for Daydream? So we use their camera rig when we're doing our development. So instead of using SteamVR's camera rig or player prefab, we use VRTK's camera rig and then let them figure out what that means when SteamVR launches. It's possible they swap it with the SteamVR camera rig, but it's also probably even more probable that they just update their camera rig to be compatible with the hand controls for the Vive and that kind of stuff. But the point is that we don't have to worry about it if we're using VRTK. We do things the VRTK way and then let them handle the details of how that needs to be translated for the different headsets. Make sense?
SDK setup. Put us back into SteamVR mode. So it's very useful for switching in-game to the relevant SDK if you need to. And now we can also go to different example scenes. So if we open up the static object on graph example scene, and now if we just click play, we don't have to do any changes again because this will already be set up to use the SteamVR SDK. Then you can see we're in this example scene, we can flip these up and I snap accordingly to the controller. And that's as simple as it is to set up SteamVR. What we'll now do is look up how to set up the SteamVR SDK manager if you were using your own fresh scene and not one of the example scenes.
Yep. So this is
the easiest thing to do
this is what he's talking about.
Create a new example scene. So we'll just create a new scene here.
So this is what we would probably all do. Is, you know, what he was showing us there is one of the pre-built scenes. Everything's already set up. So now he's saying, okay, now that you kind of get the gist of what's going on. What if we had a fresh scene that you want to have all this set up in? How do you do it? Okay.
I'll call it test. And then we'll go to the example scene that we already have open, and we'll just copy the VRTK object. And then in the test example scene that we'll open, we'll just...
Okay, so one thing he just did there, he kind of undersold what he was doing. So in that scene, he had a VRTK object, and I'm going to show you how they create that in a different video. We'll take a little break, and I'll show you that. So this is kind of a quick intro, and then I'm going to show you a little bit more involved thing of how that thing got built. Because he just grabbed this VRTK object from that sample scene, right? Magically. It's like, well, the sample scene had already worked fine. So we'll just take that and bring it into ours. It's fine. You can do that. I mean, why reinvent the wheel, right? But we do want to understand a little bit what's happening in that VRTK object. So when you first set up VRTK in your scene, if you're not going to steal from one of their scenes and you were having to set it up fresh, that actually gives you some understanding of how VRTK is set up under the hood, which I think can benefit us. So we will look at that. But what he's doing right now is kind of a shortcut. He's probably saving himself 10 minutes of creating his own VRTK object and throwing the right stuff into it for getting this thing set up. That makes sense? So understand that what he just did there was a major shortcut that we will illuminate here in a little bit.
Paste in that object, and we'll delete the existing camera that's in there.
All right, so he's taking out the default camera and the directional light that comes with every brand new scene, and then he pasted in this magical, extremely important VRTK game object that just is going to work for him because he stole it from the other thing, but we will look at that.
We don't need the two cameras, and now if we run that, it just use our existing setup. So as you can see, we've just copied the setup and it's working with Steamvr by default. So what we'll now do is we'll delete this and we'll show how to set up the SDK manager from scratch, without copying it in from one of the example scenes. So
at least he recognized that he was taking an unnecessary shortcut. Well, probably a smart shortcut, but for us to understand it, unnecessary shortcut.
What we'll do is create a new empty game object, and we'll just call this VRTK SDK. And that's going to have the SDK manager script on it. And by default, it won't have anything.
All right, so that's the kind of the important starting point. Is he created an empty game object, but he attached this script that comes with VRTK. So this VRTK SDK manager. So this top level guy, his job is to manage the various SDKs that you want to support. Okay.
On there, and then within here we'll create another empty object, and we'll just call this Steamvr Sdk. And within there, we're going to go into the Steamvr folder, and we're going to grab the camera rig profile. I'm going to put it in there, and we're also going to grab the Steamvr.
So I think this is starting to talk about what you're talking about. So, so that kind of answers your question, actually, how it's actually working. So. Joseph had asked the question, well, SteamVR comes with their own camera rig. Oculus SDK comes with their own camera rig. So what he's doing is he's in this SteamVR SDK folder, he's throwing the appropriate camera rig for doing Steam stuff. If he were doing this for Oculus as well, he'd have a second folder called Oculus SDK, where he would have the appropriate camera rig for doing Oculus stuff. And then he'll link those back together. He'll show you how to do it for the SteamVR thing here. So with that in mind, it sounds like they would transfer control over to the correct camera rig.
VR profile, and we're going to put it in there as well. And then we're going to click back on the Steamvr SDK, and here we're going to do the SDK setup. Where we choose.
All right, so this is a script that he attached to Steamvr SDK to do a setup for that specific SDK.
Use what SDK this is actually for. So this one is going to be for Steamvr. What we need to do is click the quick select and click Steamvr, that will automatically set everything up.
Now, if I go back there real quick, just I want to pause it so you can just see the stuff that's in that setup.
Is click the quick select.
Okay, so notice here it says Daydream, it's not detecting that's installed. Oculus, not detecting it's installed. Simulator, SteamVR, and then this Zimmerse thing. Tim, do you know anything about Zimmerse? I'm guessing this guy, based on what I'm seeing here, he's maybe like something similar to VRTK, kind of like a cross-platform type of tool, but I've never worked with that. But in any case, what's more important here I wanted to show you is that Gear VR, the thing for the Samsung Gear, is now also supported. So that came out after this thing. So this exact setup they're going through right now, you can use in your project to support Daydream, Rift, Vive, and Gear VR, along with these other things that I don't know anything about. And we would assume that any new stuff that comes out, if Apple came out with something, I'm sure they would figure out a way to support it. That would make sense.
Click SteamVR. That will automatically set everything up for us. We don't need to do anything else. And then in the VRTK SDK.
Yeah, so because we set up SteamVR, even though we dropped our camera rig and SteamVR in here, because those are known prefabs, like the way you use SteamVR is the VRTK people know it. They already know how SteamVR works. So when we selected SteamVR here for the VRTK setup for this folder, or for this empty game object, it knew that we would use the camera rig for a bunch of stuff. We would use the left controller and the right controller associated with SteamVR, and we had these models associated with the left and the right controller for SteamVR, although I'm thinking these models are not, this is kind of what you were pointing out. I don't think they're SteamVR's model. I think these are, because SteamVR calls them blank controller, I think. Where this must be VRTKs. But whatever, it's already pre-filled in. These are all prefabs. You can tell because they have that bluish look. So it's already filled those in. You don't need to do any drag and drop because it knows about SteamVR. It's already a known thing.
Okay, object. We now need to add something to this list for it to auto-load. So we're going to add one here. And then we
So now he's up on the VRTK SDK. So that top level folder, working with the VRTK SDK manager. So the top level SDK manager. So he's adding another thing here for our SteamVR.
need to tell it which one to put in there. So we're just going to grab this and drag it and drop it onto there. So now we've told the SDK manager that we want to also load our SteamVR SDK. Once we've added the SteamVR SDK setup to the SDK manager, we're just going to click auto-populate to make sure it fixes anything that it needs to. And then once we've done that, we can click play, and then we'll be using the SteamVR SDK. As you can see, I'm now using.
So that last part there is pretty important. So if you just think about the generic thing of what we're doing here, he has this top level folder that holds all the VRTK setup stuff, right? Then you'll have another game object for each of the platforms you want to support with their setup for that. And then when you go back to that top level, you have to let that guy know about each of your individual ones. And then when you hit that auto-populate thing, it makes sure it connects those. Okay? It's almost an MVC type of approach. So it'll connect those pieces to make sure it'll work well together.
In the SteamVR SDK, and we set that SDK manager up from scratch. Now, if we wanted to connect scripts to our controllers, what we can do is we just create a couple of game objects. We'll call this one left controller, and we'll create another one called right controller. And now in the SDK, we just need to tell it these script aliases. So the left controller goes there, and the right controller goes there. And then on here, we just add the VRTK pointer.
All right, so what he's doing here is notice that this left controller and right controller thing lives inside of the VRTK SDK, but is outside of SteamVR SDK. So these two guys are part of, I'm going to back up just a little bit here just so you can see where he connected those. So these guys are at the VRTK SDK level. So for that script manager, we let the guy know about the Steamvr setup, but then we also gave it some script aliases for the left and the right controller for that guy, because that guy supports motion controllers. So we have a single left and right empty game object that will hold our scripts for us that we want to ultimately attach to our controllers. And we'll let VRTK actually do the attaching for us, but this allows us to write the logic for our controllers once. And then in terms of VRTK, and that's what he's doing this next thing. So we're adding a script to I don't know if he does it to the left and the right or just the left, but he's adding a script to it for a pointer, to create a pointer. But the script he's adding is a VRTK script. So it's how do pointers work using the VRTK way of making pointers work. All right, and then that automatically then gets translated into something that'll work in Steamvr.
Is there, and then on here we just add a VRTK pointer, a renderer for it as well. We use a straight pointer renderer, and we'll put that onto there. Then we also need to add on here the controller events.
Okay, so he's doing a lot of stuff pretty quickly here. So on the right controller, he added the script called the VRTK pointer. All right, so this guy knows how to be a pointer. But this pointer also required a renderer, all right, to make the pointer look like something. We lucked out. That was not a bad one. But during our break here in a minute, I'm going to figure out how to turn this off. That's going to be pretty important, I think. At some point, things are going to happen. All right, so we have a pointer renderer here. So this VRTK pointer script that he dropped in had a blank line here. It was expecting some sort of pointer renderer that allows the pointer to show up. So he got that from this VRTK straight pointer renderer. So he attached another script to it. So that was our second script. Okay. So once he did that, he drug that guy up here to the renderer. Right, so he's kind of doing, this is the VRTK magic that you need to do to create a pointer, for example. He threw a couple of scripts in here. He's about to throw another one, but that's kind of what's going on.
And because we've told the SDK manager that the script aliases are these game objects, this will tell the VRTK to put the relevant controllers within our SDK. So if we now just run the scene, we can now see that pressing touchpad by default activates our pointer. And that's as simple as it is to set up the VRTK SDK manager to work with Steamvr. I hope this has been a useful tutorial video. If it has, please like the video, subscribe to the channel and leave some comments. Also, if you need any further help, please join the Slack channel at chat.vrtk.io. If you're not already a member, you can invite yourself to the Slack channel by using invite.vrtk.io, and that will get you straight into the Slack channel where there's plenty of other devs that'll help out you.
Okay, so I'm actually just going to back it up here for a second and pause it at that point. All right, so what we're going to do is let's take about a 10-minute break. When we come back, we're going to go ahead and try to do the same setup on ours, but for the Oculus. Okay, and see if we can follow the exact same instructions to get a pointer working on Oculus using the Oculus SDK, kind of proof of concept that guy will work with Steamvr. That make sense? All right, so go ahead and take 10 minutes, and then we will reconvene here.